Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Stuart Keithley. I shall be chairing tonight's committee. And before we start, it's got a little bit of housekeeping for you. The no fire test, so if the fire bell goes, we know we're going to have to evacuate. We go back out through reception and we'll muster in the car park of the Windmill pub. So that's for fire. These are live streamed and recorded meetings. So members and anybody that's registered to speak, please can you make sure your microphone's in front of you when you speak so we can pick up your voices accurately. It's also a meeting held in public, not a public meeting, which means only if you're registered to speak can you do so. Okay, so I'll just introduce the top table. So on the right of me, Ciara Keller, Democratic Services. Sue Mullins is our legal advisor tonight. Emily Napier is our planning manager. And we've got two case officers, Joe Brook and Josh Cooper. Emily, you've got a statement to read out about your role in this committee meeting.
Thank you, Chair. My role tonight is to provide impartial advice to committee members and to assist members in their decision taking.
Thanks, Emily. And members, just draw your attention to the update sheet. There's not much on it, but it's in front of you. Okay. So we can start the meeting. Ciara, could you give us any apologies for absence, please?
We have apologies from Councillors Hencher, Serafin and Padgham.
Thanks very much. And I do know that we're waiting on a couple of late arrivals, but if we start this meeting, they'll have to just sit out until we get on to the next item once we get to the first one. Members, disclosures of interest, please. Councillor Harding.
Thank you, Chair. My partner is an occasional volunteer at the Net Zero Hub at 30 Mere Street. I'm also a town councillor, but I was not a party to this planning application. It was dealt with under Chairman's delegated powers. So I come to this with an open mind.
Right, okay, thanks very much. Councillor Passingham.
I know this speaker on the application from Mere Street, but I have an open mind on this application.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Eden.
Thank you, Chair. One of the potential speakers, Mr. Phillips, in the gallery, is known to me, but I've not discussed this application with him in any way, so I come with an open mind on that.
Okay, I've got my own disclosures. I used to be on Luddington Parish Council, and the current chair, Andy Hibbert, is going to speak tonight, and I live quite close to the Borden Hill application, so I drive past it regularly. But I come to this with an open mind the same. So, any further disclosures? No? In which case we can move on to the agenda. And the first item on tonight's agenda is application 2503048. It's a planning in principle application, land between Clunes and Sundial on Borden Hill. And the presenting officer is Joe Brook. So Joe, if you're ready, if you'd like to take us through this application, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just give us 2 seconds to set up the presentation. The application is situated on Borden Hill, just outside the Stratford-on-Avon built-up area boundary, which is set out in the NDP and also the inset map in the core strategy. I'll go into more detail on the location in 2 seconds.
Hang on a second. Joe, just hold on a second, please. Councillor Rolfe, please come in and sit down. Yeah, I know you got stuck in traffic, it's fine. It's just that we're just starting, but what I'll do is ask Joe to start again so that you can participate in the debate on this application. I need to ask you if you've got any disclosures of interest in respect of either of the applications on the agenda. Okay, that's fine. So if you could note that, please, Ciara. Thanks very much. Right, Joe, if you'd start again for me, please. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. As indicated by the black dot before you, the application site is located on Borden Hill on the Evesham Road. It is outside the built area boundary, which is set out in the inset map on the core strategy and the NDP. I'll go into more detail on the location in a minute. So, as shown in the red line before you, this is the application site in itself. The purple dashed line shows, or pink dashed line shows Evesham Road run along. There is obviously a parallel public footpath as indicated by the green dashed line. The row of houses, my cursor's working, yeah, the row of houses here is leading into Borden Hill, into Stratford-upon-Avon. So this, before you, gives a lot better sort of aerial imagery of the site. So the site itself, just make sure cursor literally is there. So you then have the Shottery development that is taking place, obviously Anne Hathaway's cottage, and also this here is the Borden Hill appeal site for 130 houses. Borden Hill Nurseries is adjacent to the site. This is the Evesham Road, and obviously this is there is Lime Avenue, where it is discussed about the bus stop that is already existing. So this is the application site in itself. It is fundamentally an open field at this moment in time because there is extant permission for the equestrian use regarding excavation works, but ultimately this is it, showing the slope and the incline. I would advise members to also take note of the public footpath adjacent because that is material in consideration leading to the site. If my cursor works, there we go. So before you are some of the photos within the site. So the one to the top left, where the cursor is showing Borden Hill Nurseries across the Evesham Road. This is just showing to the sort of like to the right hand side heading, so Evesham Road up there, just showing the trees and the existing vegetation. This is across again for the Borden Hill Nurseries, so this is the Evesham Borden Hill Road here, and this is obviously a view of the open nature site, which has got a number of trees situated within it. I have purposely put this one in as well because this is a view at the brow of the site leading on to Stratford-upon-Avon, because I know concerns have been raised regarding the setting of Anne Hathaway's cottage and so forth. So looking through this gives you a distant shot of the application site looking back towards Stratford-upon-Avon at its highest point, I have to highlight. And that's it, Chair. As set out in the officer's report, it is a permission in principle application, so only land use, location and scale are considerations. And officer recommendation is to grant for up to 9 houses. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thanks very much, Joe. Right, we have some speakers on this item, and the first speaker is Andy Hibbett, who's the Chair of Luddington Parish Council. Good evening, Councillor Hibbett. If you'd like to come up to the desk for us. Thank you. Right, so I made the comments about the microphone. If you could position yourself so you've got a clear voice on the microphone. Right-hand button on those silver buttons should turn it on. Are you ready? Have you got any material you want to share?
I've got 4 photographs.
Do you have those, Joe?
I'm going to raise my hand when they're time to be shown.
Right, okay.
But given the time, if they just scroll through as I talk, I'm not going to have time to stop and speak to each one.
That's fine. Okay. So you've got 3 minutes to speak. Tell us about your objection to this, and I'll give you just a bit of a heads up as we approach the 3 minutes, okay, so you can finish off. Okay. So whenever you're ready to go, over to you.
Good evening. I'm Andy Hibbett, Chair of Luddington Parish Council and Chair of our Road Safety Working Group. I represent the agreed view of Luddington Parish Council. Luddington is an adjacent parish, literally across the road from the development site. Unfortunately, we were not consulted. However, I am here now and wish to raise 4 principal issues in objection to the planning in principle application. First, this is Borden Hill, a key landscape of Stratford-upon-Avon. It's a protected view in the Luddington Design Statement, endorsed by this council as a material consideration in the determination of planning applications. It can be seen for miles around. The development, if approved, will be here forever. Borden Hill landscape will be ruined forever. You cannot allow this to happen. Secondly, any development of Borden Hill must be strategic, not piecemeal. The existing planning policy does not designate this site as suitable for development, nor does the new South Warwickshire Plan consultation. If this is approved, where will development of Borden Hill end? It surely sets a precedent for the 89 Bellway Homes Borden Hill application. 25/02713/FUL that is still being considered? And how about the 6 hectares across the road, WK 325502, and recently cleared? Third, there are known flooding issues arising from the new houses built in the Shottery Brook Basin, particularly the capacity of the brook, designated as a river due to its flood risk, the numerous natural springs from the hill and the erosion being caused to existing houses on Luddington Road by the brook. Further development increases the flooding issues. Fourth, and can you start rolling the slides through? Thank you. Fourth, I live on Evesham Road in Dodwell. I know firsthand how dangerous it is to cross the road to reach the footpath on the other side, and the road is straight here. I've sent in 2 screenshots showing the inadequate visibility displays in each direction at the development site. And on Google Maps, I've measured them to be no more than 60 metres in each direction, and the development site's on the inside of that curve. House owners will be taking their lives into their hands trying to cross the footpath. I've also attached 2 screenshots showing the gradient of the hill. The contour map shows 25-metre increase in height over 150 metres, which is 1 in 6.
If you could bring it to a conclusion for me now, thanks.
So in summary, Borden Hill landscape must be protected. The site is unsuitable for development. There are significant flooding issues, and the highways challenges of this site are insurmountable. The weight to these principal issues is significantly higher than those assessed and outweigh the benefits. The PIP should be refused. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to finish.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor Hibbett. Okay, members, do you have any questions for Councillor Hibbett, please? Yes, Councillor Ballinger.
Good evening. Can you just remind me what the speed limit is, please, around up the road?
Yeah.
Sorry, up the hill, just to clarify.
Yes, Stratford bound it's 40 miles an hour and Evesham bound it's 50. It changes just after the Borden Hill nursery entrance.
Let's have a follow-up.
No, yes?
Yeah. And are you aware of any accidents that have happened there over the years?
I don't, I'm not aware one way or the other. I haven't studied it.
Okay. Further questions? No? In which case, thanks very much, Councillor Hibbett, for your representations. Okay, so our second speaker on this item is Gary Phillips, an architect. If you'd like to come forward, please, Mr. Phillips. Thank you. See, the microphone is still on. If you could, if you just make, that's it. So 3 minutes for you as well, if you could tell us a bit more about your application.
Thank you very much. My apologies, I'm standing in for Gary Moss, who's the main agent on this scheme, but we have a history with the extant permission for the site, so that's why I'm here tonight, because he's ill. So just, if I first start off with the planning in principle application, obviously that permits effectively up to 9 dwellings. That's not to say that you are looking at a scheme of 9. We are only looking at the principle. And secondly, a planning in principle application obviously doesn't effectively incorporate technical matters and character. So obviously, it was obviously referred to in relation to the highway access, but that isn't something that in theory councillors should be considering at this stage. Obviously, if this application is permitted tonight, then a further application would come forward with numbers of dwellings that would hopefully address any issues or concerns in relation to visibility, access. So we are looking at the principle of the development itself. That's not to say these aren't important factors, but this is effectively a previously developed site, albeit that it's extant the permission at the moment. It's a sustainable location in that, if, for instance, if you went onto Google, you will see people jogging past the site using the access way. Obviously, if we develop a scheme to go forward, we will have to consider biodiversity and positioning of any dwellings or units on the site. So we would have to enhance this landscape as it is now today by 10% as the current policy in place from a national point of view. And the last one, obviously on the character, obviously as officers have said, there were some concerns raised about Anne Hathaway's house, but there are 3 wooded areas between our site and the Anne Hathaway's house, the historical sort of fabric. So basically our location is quite some distance away, and obviously there are other development sites that are coming forward potentially. We're not aware of any flooding issues, but again, that is a technical matter which effectively isn't part of this application consideration. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. That was well within your 3 minutes. Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Phillips, please? Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. You mentioned the application is for 1 to 9 houses or dwellings. Was it open to you to make an application for 1 to any other number between 1 and 9? And if you decided not to do that, why did you do that?
In theory, we haven't progressed the scheme to that level of detail because obviously, as we've discussed, we would obviously have to look at the technical aspects of coming into the site from the visibility displays, obviously turning and that for driveways, and all that will impact on the scheme itself. Obviously, landscape character would be a consideration, so it may be that you will have less properties because you'd want to set them down so that they aren't effectively out of character or they seem to appear to fit into the street scene. So all these things at a more detailed stage would be considered. So effectively the application process allows for 1 to 9 dwellings, but we haven't been specific. It's only the principle at this stage, and that's no other reason that the client hasn't engaged effectively with that level of technical support to the application at this stage.
Councillor Harvey, do you have a follow-up question on that?
Just to observe, then what you're saying to the committee is that you could have 1 house in the end on this site if this application is consented.
Potentially, yes.
Councillor Ballinger, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Good evening. I note that you mentioned that there are joggers that regularly jog up and down, but forgive me, I believe the path is on the other side. Mm-hmm. So how would you ensure safety or potential safety elements for kind of like people crossing, etc.? I know that this is a principle, and I can see what the highways are currently saying, but what potential plans would you put in place?
So effectively, the site as it is at the moment obviously is on a long stretch of road, so there is good visibility in either direction. I actually, by coincidence, had to go to Oxhill, so effectively from one end of the district to another, and there was people walking along there yesterday because it was a lovely day. So I would imagine that people cross the road at the moment. There are other dwellings adjacent to this site. There's also a car dealership as well as the nurseries. So there would be a lot of activity, I would imagine, generally in and around the site. So again, I can't comment on the detail because obviously that's of a technical nature, but I don't see this site being any different from anywhere else in the district. It would be something that would obviously be considered, no doubt, with speed surveys and then visibility assessments with a proper transport consultant appointed. Thank you.
If you've got any further questions in respect of those representations and visibilities and stuff, you can ask the case officers when we get to points of clarification. Councillor Harvey.
Supplementary question. Numbers again, I'm afraid. One of the objectors who wrote in to the case officer used the phrase of the prospect of a 9-dwelling development as an estate development. How do you respond to that label?
Well, were this a full application, where we were looking at character, I would probably say that the site wouldn't necessarily be suitable for an estate development, just purely because of the, I suppose, the ribbon type development that you've got along there. So there's a property adjacent sundial. So there, I would imagine that you would have less than 9 properties if you were fronting the site, you know, which is probably the developable part of the site, where obviously you're at a lower level and you would be effectively following the pattern of the street scene.
Do you think you could fit 9 houses fronting onto the Evesham Road?
I think it's unlikely, but the reality is that, you know, that hasn't been looked at and that isn't part of the application. So I'm not trying to, but it's just not something that is obviously part of the detail stage of this application at the moment. But the reality is that I think that the site would be unsuitable for that type of development. Just purely, it doesn't feel right to me as an architect. Thank you.
Right, thanks very much for that question. Just to say, I don't need to remind you, I know Councillor Harvey, but this is an application for up to 9. So, Councillor Harding.
Thanks, Chair. Most of the safety comments have been in regard to people exiting from the site and pedestrians. Looking at the photographs, we've got a double white line system through that because it's not safe to overtake. Forward visibility is extremely limited. I would be very worried about turning right into there. What measures can you take to make that safer? What's the forward visibility? And have you taken any speed readings yet?
Well, I suppose to sort of not to poo-poo your concerns, I would say that obviously at the moment this is not a technical application, and we would obviously take, if this scheme came forward, we would obviously take the correct advice from a transport consultant who in themselves would have a speed survey undertaken and properly assess these matters to ensure that obviously there isn't any harm from traffic turning and whatever to the site.
Thanks for that. Councillor Harding, you can ask points of clarification in respect of the PIP and the second stage, which is the TDC of the case officers when we get to those questions. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Rolfe.
Thank you. I have a very similar situation in my ward, which I won't go into, but it does have a path on the opposite side of a main road to a development. Would you consider, as part of the detailed application, to put in some form of mitigation so that people can cross that road? Because I think there's a huge element of safety aspect here. So would that be a consideration when you put in your detailed planning application?
I certainly think that would be a consideration, and ultimately we haven't, you know, I mean, quite often we'll go to a planning application meeting like this, a planning committee meeting, and it may be that we're presenting a detailed transport consultant's advice from effectively the applicant's perspective, and then we've got a similar sort of detailed advice from the Highways Authority themselves. Here in this particular application, we haven't got either. So obviously I can only sort of say that in principle, I don't see any mitigation being an issue, but obviously that would be something to look at once we've got those detailed surveys.
Thank you for that answer. Could I just ask a point of clarification? Does the application include a pedestrian crossing to the other side of the road?
No, it doesn't, because it's obviously just the red line within the boundaries of the site itself.
Okay, thanks. We can check that later. Okay, any further questions? No, Mr. Phillips, thanks very much indeed for coming along. Okay, our third speaker on this is Councillor Coles. If you'd like to come forward, Councillor Coles, good evening. Okay, so I think you know the drill, but you've got 5 minutes to tell us about your objection to this scheme, Councillor Coles, and I'll turn mine off and then you'll be on. Have you got any further slides, Councillor Coles?
No, I don't have any
Okay,
slides,
that's
no.
fine.
No, sorry, there's the boring section of the presentation. Thank you, everybody. My name is Liz Coles. I'm the ward councillor for Hathaway Ward, and this application is on the edge of my ward. I have grave concerns about this application, even though it is not detailed. It is just a PIP, and will bring them in order of not necessarily importance, but at least level of detail. I am concerned, and I have residents who are concerned about the application due to the fact that it is on an extremely busy main road. There is concern about the sight lines and additional access to the road, which will add pressure, especially when you take into consideration the dual white line and no crossing over the lanes. There is some information already from the highways in terms of their report or letter of January the 26th, outlining concerns that if 9 houses are built and you have to have access into that site, to that development, if 9 houses or more than 6 houses built, they would have to create a bell junction. In order, you couldn't use a drop-down access into and out of the site, and there is a question raised over whether that site is actually suitable. The land and the layout is suitable for a bell junction. In addition to which, if you look at it, there is restricted view, there's a bend in the road, there's a hill, and in order to improve access and sight into the site, you would be having to take down trees and hedging along the edge of the road to work with that junction and to improve the sites in and out of the area. At the moment, obviously, the technical work hasn't been done, but there's no indication of how that could be done and how that would happen, except for having presumably to create additional road access to take account of the fact that you only have a single lane, which cannot be exited onto the other side because of the double white line. There is also a question over the sustainability of the site with regard to things like service vehicle access and manoeuvring within the site for things like refuse collection, deliveries entering and exiting and turning within the site. The north side of the road, the north side of Evesham Road footpath is not suitable for hire pedestrian use. I can claim testament to that because I regularly clank with my knees up and down that side of the road. It is rough. I need to keep an eye on how I walk because of potential trip hazards. It's very narrow, and I do on occasion choose, if it is a quiet day, which is not very often, to actually walk to the edge of that, or actually occasionally on parts of it to the on the actual road itself. I don't care to cross the road to the south side because it is a busy road. It can be very heavy use of vehicles at the time, and I don't feel safe crossing that road to take advantage of the wider footpath. There has been concerns raised in the submissions to the application and talking to residents of increasing flooding problems on the hill. This has been an issue in other sites where developments have been made and the surface drainage has been affected, and affected areas lower down the hill, you have an accumulation of water which is not draining naturally on the site and it goes somewhere else, and especially if it goes into existing developments or houses, you get an additional access of floodwater coming into those sites. There's an environmental impact. There is some information, but not enough. There isn't a definite conclusion, but certainly initial reports seem to indicate that the habitat is likely to be of very high distinctiveness. And I really do think that caution should be taken before that is interfered with any development. It's late to take it away and then try and put it back if it's there in the first place. Why would you change it? It's there. You don't need to build on it. It's there. Leave it. Borden Hill is a highly important part of our national landscape. It is a primary route into leading to Hathaway's house as well as into the town. And the landscape offers a green and undeveloped view over Stratford town itself. It has, sadly, been developed in the lower area, and a recent appeal, as was mentioned earlier, will allow further development up the hill, despite it being acknowledged that would be an impact at the Anne Hathaway site.
You're coming up to 5 minutes now,
Right.
if you'd mind
As a
closing
local-
up.
Yes, as a local councillor, I can only be very disturbed that that landscape will be further developed. Once it's gone, it's gone. The application is for 1 to 9 houses. I understand this is an outline, not even an outline, planning in principle, but once that principle has been set, it could be up to 9 houses. I don't think the site is suitable. Certainly my residents don't agree it's suitable. And I certainly think if you are considering this, you should be looking perhaps at setting some sort, I would ask that you look at setting some sort of limit actually on the number of dwellings that would be allowed because of the traffic, pedestrian, landscape, flooding and the rest that would be associated with that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Coles. Okay, members, do you have any questions for Councillor Coles, please? Okay, Councillor Ballinger.
Good evening. Are you aware of any accidents that happen up around that area? And then second of all, I've got another question, you might as well answer them at the same time. Well, you heard from the agent just a minute ago that obviously there's property, I think there's properties up there and there's obviously a car garage. Are you aware of anybody walking to those vicinities?
Well, my knees would bear testament to the fact that I have walked there, but I have to say when I do go, I've actually very rarely encounter other pedestrians when I'm walking up and down. This is during the day, occasionally at the weekend. I don't see a lot of people walking. There isn't a high pedestrian traffic as far as I'm aware. And again, I'm not actually aware of accidents, but due to, you know, if the number of pedestrians increased and you had people crossing, the potential for accidents, I think, could be increased.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Perhaps an observation, Councillor Coles, in respect to what you said about limiting the numbers for this application. The application in front of us is for up to 9, so we have to consider up to 9 at this point. Okay, well, thanks very much for that, Councillor Coles. Okay, members, I think now's the opportunity to ask questions to the case officer. So we've got one hand up already, 2 hands, 3 hands. Oh, okay, give me a chance. Councillor Rolfe, please first.
Thank you, Chair. Joe, could you possibly show me, to remind me, where the public footpath is in relation to where the site is, and where the public footpath comes, says in the report that it leads to where the bus stop might be. Could you just show me where it is? Because I mean, I know the area, but I can't picture the footpath and how close it is to the development.
So this photo before you sort of indicates it. The footpath is literally that footpath there that leads into Stratford.
Sorry. Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, the public footpath.
Yeah, that is the public footpath.
That's it.
Yeah, it's a single carriageway. You go in Stratford from that, so then you lead. So across the road, that leads all, and also leads at the Dodwell, leads all the way into Evesham. And then, yes, as Councillor Coles rightly highlighted, you can cross over to the larger footpath. The bus stop that is existing, so this is without the Borden Hill development, is on Lime Avenue, which is that avenue there.
Sorry, I do apologise. I thought there was a public footpath within the field. No. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I think I had Councillor Harvey next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the 3 characteristics that we can use to test this application in principle on is scale of development. Was it open to the applicant to make an application for 1 or any other number other than 9, up to 9, and the consequence of that would be if it was open to the applicant to have said 1 to 4, for argument's sake, that would be a different application than 1 to 9. Was that option open to the applicant?
Under the PIT regulations, yeah. So basically, you have to put in a minimum and maximum number. The applicant has decided to put in 1 to 9 units for consideration.
I think I had Councillor, was it Adam and Harding? You had a question as well, Councillor Harding. Do you want to go first, Councillor Harding, and then I'll come back to Councillor Adam? I think I'll write your name down first.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification. About halfway down page 7, in italics, we've got the applicant has changed the description of development to include associated works, including a pedestrian crossing. I thought the applicant said that that wasn't on the table. I'm a bit confused.
I think, in fairness to the speaker, Gary Moss was the original agent. So what happened during the course of the application, Highways had obviously raised their concerns. Now, under a permission in principle application, we can't do 106s or conditions. So it's a way to alleviate that concern as much as possible. They included in the description of development to include a pedestrian crossing. In essence, and it isn't straightforward, but in essence, to meet the description of development, they do need to now facilitate a pedestrian crossing.
And would that be just a refuge, or would that be full-blown pelican crossing? Do you know?
That would have to come to TDC matters.
Okay, Councillor Adam.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask that question, but I've also had one on highways. There is an outstanding objection from highways on this. It seems to be a salient aspect of the objections from pretty much all the speakers. Running through the comments in the report, they seem to be fairly comprehensive in what we've had from highways, and yet essentially it doesn't seem to be attributing much weight in objection. So I suppose I'm just trying to ascertain how much weight does that objection hold when considering the balance, because it doesn't seem to be kind of set out that way, whereas it's clearly a significant part from both highways as a consultee and obviously the other consultees as well.
I think, and I appreciate I've managed a number of committees now, so once again, the decision maker makes the weighting. So in this essence, when I've undertaken the assessment, I've done quite a lot of detail weighting regarding the footpath, regarding the access, regarding the possibility of the Bellmouth pedestrian crossing. So that weighting has all come into essence in the report, and it is in there. The issue with this, and this is the joys we have permissions in principle, is you are only seeking fundamentally the principle of development. Highways comments from my assessment is the basis they have said appears, so that means that they haven't definitively said that they couldn't do a Bellmouth, and at the same time the applicant has changed the description of development to put in a pedestrian crossing across the road. That highlights there is a reasonable prospect that they could do a pedestrian crossing to meet across the road. The other issues regarding sustainability, I've gone on into the weighting regarding the suitability of the pedestrian footpath, also the reasonable prospect of Borden Hill coming forward, and all this is on the balance. Yourselves as members may very well disagree with that and choose a different weighting, but that's how I've come to my assessment. There is undeniably issues with access and highways. I don't think, in my opinion, as the officer for this, that is a principal issue. It's a TDC matter issue. And at this moment in time, I consider as the officer that it hasn't been demonstrated to me that they couldn't devise a scheme to deliver 9 units on this site.
Councillor Ballinger, I think you had a question.
Yeah, a lot of mine have kind of been answered, but can I just ask a question in terms of, and sorry if this sounds a bit blasé, but if we go, yes, okay, you know, as a committee, we say, yes, we grant this, and then it gets through to the second round, as it were, ding, ding, and then it's kind of, well, actually, because currently at the moment, my concerns are around road safety, pedestrian crossings. That's my major concern. I drive up to Bidford towards that road quite regularly. I haven't for some time, but it is really dangerous in certain areas, and that's kind of like my main concern. So, kind of, what reassurance can we have that actually that, you know, the highways would, you know, take that into consideration?
So in all honesty, the permission in principle doesn't come with full planning application, so a full permission, until you do the technical detail stage. You have to have this application, which is a permission in principle, and then the technical detail stage. So if highways were still raising, I have to highlight, you can never say never because you don't know what might be raised in benefits and various things, but it would be a significant consideration if highways maintained a very strong objection against the development. And if they don't overcome those concerns, we have every right as an officer and as the committee to refuse the technical detail stage. Therefore, they never get that planning permission because they have never demonstrated under technical details that they can deliver successful access to the site. So it's the two combined that makes the permission.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Joe, I'm going to follow that up with a question in a different area, if I could. On your page 9, if I could turn you to page 9, and we're really getting on to the impact on landscape and character, and that's something that the speakers in objection have mentioned. You agree, I think, or concur with the assessment that the development of 9 dwellings would cause harm to this landscape. And although you said that there are certain things that can only be considered at the TDC stage, there are some things like land use and scale that can be considered at the PIP stage. Can you just give us your assessment again, please, of up to 9 dwellings on the impact of the landscape at this location?
Certainly, Councillor. So ultimately, it is up to 9 dwellings, so you should take in the worst case scenario. I appreciate it's been mentioned it can be less, and that is absolutely right, but it is up to 9 dwellings. I have identified harm because you are going to urbanise that site. It will undoubtedly create not only dwellings, but also the access onto it, the tarmac, the drives, so forth, paraphernalia. So there will be harm on that landscape site, and I've also highlighted that it doesn't comply with policy. However, the world we're now in with the 5-year land supply, where it's a waiting act, I've identified that harm to be moderate. One reason being is I am not in my opinion, it has not been conclusively determined to me. There is no way that they couldn't do has to be a really well-designed scheme, I'll admit, where it has lots of landscaping, the levels match the neighbouring properties, it works within the surrounding setting, that you couldn't deliver something on that site, which then weighed against the 5-year land supply and the other benefits, outweighs the harm that I have identified. It's not straightforward. There's no whistle buts about that, but that's how it is.
Okay. Well, I think I understand where you're coming from, but we have heard from the speaker that an estate-type development might not be suitable there, and we have to consider up to 9 houses on this land. So do you think that moderate harm in the context of up to 9 houses is still the right one?
For me, yes, because at this moment in time, that would probably be a TDC matter. You'd be able to then identify, I actually agree, I don't think estate, I will say that here, I don't think an estate development on that site would be appropriate and in all likelihood would be refused. But if there was an appropriate design with landscaping and various other things that they might associate, I really don't know because it depends what they come in with. It is a possibility at this moment in time that it would be acceptable against the 5-year land supply issues and the significant weight that we afford that. So I would still at this moment offer moderate weight given that we do not have that information in front of me.
Councillor Ballinger again.
Can I just ask then, in simple terms, in numbers then, so if you're saying up to 9 dwellings would potentially would cause harm, is that the maximum 9 in your opinion that will cause harm, or is it 1 dwelling? So is it at least 1 dwelling, or is it up to 9? Just in my brain.
In my opinion, any development on that site would likely cause harm, especially given that we've done the landscape review, so the 2012 review that is referenced in the report. That is, in my opinion, that it will cause harm. The 9 dwellings is the worst case scenario. So 1 dwelling in all likelihood would cause less harm than 9 dwellings. But we as officers have to, and I would advise members the same to be honest, have to consider the worst case. This application is up to 9 dwellings. So I would advise members, and as I have done, to assess that on the basis of 9 units.
Okay with that, Councillor Ballinger. Councillor Harvey?
Yes, perhaps an obtuse point, but I don't think the report mentions what grade the agricultural land is. Has this particular field been assessed? Is it of best possible quality, or is it not? And is it relevant?
It's relevant, but the problem being with that, it's got extant permission for equestrian use. So that's already kind of been assessed and taken away, in all honesty. Yeah.
Okay with that. Councillor Passingham?
Yes, thank you. Can we identify on the map where the planning permission that was granted by the inspector for Borden Hill is in relation to this development?
Absolutely. It's literally, so I'll just make sure my cursor's viewable. It's this site here. So it's all the way, it's not great, the cursor when it works on it, coming all the way down there on the ribbon development, and then, sorry, do apologise, then coming back up along the ring road. I hope that's clear. Unfortunately, it freezes when I try and show it on the screen.
So it more or less, it fills a lot of the land between this proposed development and Anne Hathaway's cottage then?
The 130 units, the inspector's decision certainly does, yes.
Okay. Any further questions? No? Okay, let's bring that to a conclusion then. Thank you very much for that, Joe. Right, members, here's an opportunity to debate, share your views on this application. Who'd like to start? That's Councillor Rolfe.
I'm quite heartened to hear Joe reiterate 3 times already the harm that up to 9 houses will cause. And he used the word urbanise. I'd written all that down before he said that, because in my opinion, I think that is the most sensitive, the most interesting entrance to Stratford, that road, that there is in all of them. And I live on, off a couple of nice ones south of the river, but the Evesham Road is the most interesting aspect as you come down the hill. And I think we're in a dangerous situation of seriously urbanising an area that doesn't need to be urbanised. And I think once a crossing goes in, once those up to 9 houses goes in, and I don't know how you're going to do it other than do a small estate, I think it's going to spoil one of the nicest views that this town has as you come into Stratford. I mean, that is my opinion. I strongly object to, I strongly agree with all the highways issues that are forthcoming. But I think the sensitivity, it's very, very clearly explained at the bottom of page 9. I think the landscape and the character of the area are so important. And if there's something that we need to keep in Stratford at the edge of this town, is to keep that aspect, in my opinion. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Councillor Rolfe. That's useful. Right, I've got some hands going up now. So Councillor Ballinger, and then I'll come to you, and then Councillor Harvey after, if that's okay. Councillor Ballinger.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have issues with this, and they are down to the road safety element of it. I've got safety concerns around where the potential crossing would be, leading into 2 different speed zones quite quickly, I believe, going from memory. I'm not quite sure how people would be able to cross safely onto the road. Also, I do believe that it would cause considerable harm to the area. That area is beautiful. We've got amazing, hills around there, or Borden Hill. So I'm going to listen for a bit longer, and I'm going to, but I just want to say I don't like this whatsoever.
Okay, thanks. Just to add something, this is a permission in principle. So you've got certain things you can look at in respect of approval or rejection. Highways issues likely to be a matter for this technical stage beyond this. But I take the point you mentioned, landscape. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to. I think yes, I agree. But obviously, if we go yes past this today, then obviously we're going to probably be here at some point in the future. I would probably have to guess. But I think the main issue for me is fundamentally the ruin in the hill itself.
So landscape, yeah, that's what you're saying. Councillor Adam.
Thank you. Chair, if you don't mind, I'd quite like a very quick question to the officer again, which
Yes,
can
of
then
course.
sort of inform something I've been mulling on. Joe, could you just confirm, I'm sure it's in the report, I'm trying to find the exact phrase, with regards PIP applications, does granting PIP contribute the numbers to the housing land supply at that point, or is it dependent upon the technical design stage for that to be a contribution?
So this is not a straightforward answer, as always. Basically, it comes down to the fact that this would be considered a windfall site, and by windfall site is that it's 10, well, it's up 9 units. Anything at 10 and above is a major application. So when you do windfall site calculations, because there is so many and because they're so scattered, even though you will drive around eventually and do the policy will count the houses, you are allowed to do, and it's in our 5-year housing land supply set out in the new there, so you can sue it. We do allowances. The allowances are taken a percentage off after 3 years. So at this moment of time, because it's 9 units, so it's a minor application, it would count towards the land supply, but it wouldn't. We wouldn't know the definitive number, obviously, until it got approval at TDC. Also, if it never got approval, it then gets taken away. But because it's that 9 units and it's a windfall site, it does make a contribution, but that doesn't mean it will be there forever. Nice and straightforward, I know.
No, thank you, Joe. So just to clarify then, so after 3 years, effectively, it falls away. Is that the time scale?
Ultimately, yes. I mean, the best I advise members to probably look at it, the best way to do it is how policy have set, and Gemma's done the 5-year land supply, and she's very good. It sets it out how windfall calculations are done, and the allowance is allowed through the MPPF for it.
Thank you. In which case, I'll enter the debate if that's okay with you, Chair. I think all the speakers have raised pertinent concerns, particularly around highways. That's the area that I was asking down as well, and I agree with those concerns, and it doesn't seem that there's a way for those to be squared with the submissions that we've had from highways and what we've got in front of us. That being said, this is a PIP application, and the officers being fairly clear in both their representations and the report that there's a limit to the weight that we can consider that based on the type of application that we have, i.e. that the technical design stage has to consider those aspects, and it is at that point at which those need to be managed and rectified to make it a full and acceptable application. On that basis, I'd say that those concerns can and should be raised at the TDS point, at which point I would thoroughly expect all the public speakers to come back and make that point again. And I feel that that would be a juncture when that argument would have more success. At the current point, we are looking at the deficit in our land supply, which this would contribute to rectifying. I accept that 9 is a small number to that, but incremental numbers do count. I feel comfortable that we have the opportunity through TDS to scrutinise and inspect, both as officers and a committee if necessary, which I'm sure it would be, to scrutinise and inspect the real impact that a proposal would have from a highways basis, as well as any other, particularly landscape, which I accept is also an incredibly pertinent aspect. But that opportunity will remain open to us, and on that basis, that effectively falls away from our determination tonight as being the significant driver. So I would say that actually we should be looking more towards approving the PIP process tonight, as is recommended, and then ensuring, as I'm sure the ward member and other consultees will, making sure that the scrutiny on any full application is observed at the TDS stage. And I think that's the proper way the process will work, and it will also enable us to add to our numbers, which is a critical aspect and goal of the council to protect the landscape.
Okay, thanks. Could I ask you for your observations? Well, I mean, you put that across very succinctly, very well. Can I ask for your observations on the landscape impact and land use and scale of the development as the PIP?
Yes, as I said, I think it is very relevant, and it's another major aspect of concern, albeit that I haven't raised it specifically myself. I fall in line with what the officer has said. Joe's been very clear a number of times that there is harm to landscape, and I think he said one house, one dwelling would do that. But in a similar way, I think that would be encompassed within any TDS stage application, because it would be the burden of overcoming that harm would then again be on the applicant. So, albeit I don't, as other speakers have said, I don't like this application myself either, but that's not what we're looking at from that point of view, because I think ultimately the final design stage has to overcome those aspects. And don't get me wrong, from a design point of view, you can have all manners of different designs. Some are better than others, and we're alive to that as a planning authority. And I think it's absolutely right that will be scrutinised to the point where it'll either be as close to acceptable as we can, or it won't be granted permission, which is obviously what's being sought by the objectors. But that's, again, for the stage hence. It's not for us right now, and actually the pressing burden on us is to get the housing numbers up, and granting it a PIP stage would allow that, and we can scrutinise any detailed plans when they come forward.
Okay, we've got some more hands popping up now, so I'm going to go to Councillor Harvey, Councillor Ballinger, Councillor Rolfe and Councillor Eden in that order.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. The start point for me for this is that this site, it doesn't comply with CS 15, 16 or AS 10, and in normal circumstances we would refuse it. The only reason we are contemplating it is because we're in the land supply position that we are, which we've been advised this week has got worse rather than better. I also take account of the fact that there is existing development either side of this site. Accepting the point about landscape and the entrance to Stratford and so on, which I totally agree with, we're left with the implications of the Borden Hill decision, not only in terms of land supply, but the fact that it's Borden Hill, that location. I think I got the impression Mr. Phillips, reading between the lines, has taken heed of, perhaps he already had taken heed before we actually said it, but it is a very different proposition to, at the next stage, to come forward with a proposal for one house as opposed to 9. I'd be very surprised if we saw a development proposed for 9 houses, if we were to grant this. But that's for the applicant to decide. On the limited basis upon which we can consider this application, location, land use and scale of development, I think I take the line that Councillor Adams takes, that there isn't enough at this stage to actually refuse, with the prospect, bearing in mind the Borden Hill decision, of defending that decision at appeal if it went to appeal. If we say yes to this as a PIP, I think the applicant has a significant challenge in front of them in coming forward with another application for the technical stage that would meet all the objections that have been raised so far around the table. So I don't know whether Councillor Adams actually proposed, but if he did, I'm prepared to second that we grant.
Sir Adam, would you like to come back in?
Happy to make that proposal on the basis of my representations.
Recommendation grant based on the officer's recommendation in his report, yeah? And seconded by Councillor Harvey. Okay, so we've got proposal and second. I've got other speakers to come in. Councillor Ballinger.
Thank you, Chair. I acknowledge what Councillor Harvey said about the 5-year housing land supply and the numbers dip in, but we were told today that that's normal practice, and with it dipping slightly for it to go back up, hopefully. Regarding this application, though, I do think there is quite a lot of harm to the local area, and I am thinking about, or I will be proposing to go against officer's recommendation, and for the reasons for, I think it is down to the fact that I read this again from the report. I concur with this assessment and consider that the development of 9 dwellings would cause harm to the surrounding landscape, and I believe that there is going to be harm to the local landscape, so therefore that is what I'm homing in on.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I think we had Councillor Rolfe next.
Thank you. I'm going to have to disagree with you, Councillor Adam. In principle, I believe there might be some mitigation on highways, but I can't agree with you on the landscape and the aspect. I think if you allow even one house, and I'm just going to mention that the planning officer reiterated 3 times that 1 or up to 9 is going to cause harm to the landscape. If we allow this to go ahead, whatever happens, there's going to be a house there, 1, 2, 3, or up to 9. And it will spoil the landscape, and I think it'll have demonstrable harm. It really will. So I'm agreeing with Councillor Ballinger. It's not a question of liking it or not liking it, because that's not a planning term. But I wish to go against the officer's recommendation on this. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you whether or not you were prepared to make a counter-proposal, in which case...
I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to make a counter-proposal solely on the issue of landscape and the character of the area. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Rolfe. I think we're going on to Councillor... hang on a second, I've got somebody talking to me. Thanks. Councillor Passingham?
Yeah.
Do you want to come back after Councillor Eden if you're just still thinking?
Oh, okay. I'll carry on.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd support the officer's recommendation on the grounds that, yes, it's going to cause harm to the landscape, but there are lots of other situations that we'll have to face because of the lack of land supply, which will harm the landscape. There's already been urbanisation approved by the inspector just down the road. There's already new developments closer to Anne Hathaway's cottage that you can say the same about. I mean, it's obvious that the highways situation can be mitigated. There are lots of instances similar where things have been allowed because of lack of visibility that can be improved, and the landscape can be mitigated in terms of screening, which is often done in situations like this. So I don't think we've got any case because of the land supply situation to really turn this down.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Eden, you wanted to come in? I'll come back to you, and you.
Thank you, Chair. I've been scribbling on the papers here in terms of the site drawing, and with something that Mr. Phillips said, that 9 houses along the front wouldn't feel comfortable. I think were his words, and I agree. I don't think you'd fit many more than 5, maybe 6 reasonable sized houses along there. Which means you have to start going up the hill. And the hill's quite steep, as we heard from our first speaker. So I'm kind of coming back on in terms of worst case scenario, as Joe said, 9 houses. we're going to go up the hill, then that becomes really quite overbearing, and that harm on the landscape, for me, then starts to become more than moderate, demonstrably more, potentially. So to that end, I'd like to second Councillor Rolfe's proposal to go against it, because the 9 is really my problem. If you came back with 1 to 4, 1 to 5, a smaller number, because you're going to get some development there. That is just effectively a fact, given where we are in principle, be it one or another. But that worst case scenario is what I'm considering, and that's why this application isn't right for me.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Councillor Ballinger again.
Sorry, if I said I was minded to propose, I can't remember what the terminology I used, but I was proposing that, obviously, to go against the officer's recommendation, but
Okay.
I'm quite happy to pass it over to Councillor Rolfe and Councillor Eden to obviously move this forward.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Ballinger. I know I'm chairing the meeting, but I'm just like you. I'm a member of this committee. I'm quite entitled to enter the debate with my own personal reflections on this, which I'm going to do in a minute. Councillor Adam.
Thanks. Just wanted to respond on the basis of the landscape. I completely agree that it isn't acceptable as is set out by the officer, but my point was that needs to be tested at the TDS stage, not at this stage, essentially. That was the only point. I wasn't saying that I was happy with it. I just think that, and I think Councillor Eden's set out a possible case which would represent a significant impact that shouldn't be approved. But that's for the burden is on the applicant to get through that TDS stage, and we're not looking at that right now.
However, the PIP is for up to 9. I just make that point.
Yeah, and just to that end, up to 9, the point is it's a scale. If they can't make an application that works from a technical point of view of 9 houses, then it won't get approved. But they've got this within that scope 6 houses.
I agree, but that's the second stage, and at the moment we're at the PIP stage. So, Councillor Rolfe.
Working. So, just going back on that, I think what I'm trying to say is that if this goes ahead, there'll be one house. It'll be spoilt. The view will be spoilt, whether it's just one house. Wherever you put it, the view is going to be spoilt. And you can't get it back. It's gone forever. As Councillor Cole said, that land will be gone forever, even if it's one house. And that's why I feel quite passionately about this. I absolutely agree with you, Councillor Adam. We can mitigate the highways, but we can't mitigate the aspect, because whatever the applicant comes forward with, it's going to be a dwelling. It's going to be seen as you come down that hill. Sorry.
Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Can I ask a technical question of the officer?
If it would help.
If this application is refused, is it open to the applicant to take it to appeal?
Yes, absolutely.
And on that basis, for me, the deciding, I take the point about the landscaping impact, but there's 130 houses going to go up 5 minutes down less than 5 minutes down the road. The fact that application was approved on appeal, if this application is refused now and taken to appeal, I would expect that Borden Hill decision to come into play and an appeal would be allowed. I'd rather us deal with an application at the next stage, on the technical stage, and if it comes back for one house, you may get one answer. If it comes back with another for 9 houses, you may get a different answer. But the committee has an opportunity to deal with that at that stage. But I think you either take Councillor Rolfe's point of view as a matter of principle, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, or in my terms, you take a more pragmatic view and say it's inevitable, but we can control it at the next stage.
Then could we just ask a point of clarification of the officers? So if for example, this were taken to appeal and the appeal was allowed, they'd still have to go through the next stage?
Yeah, regardless, you don't get the full planning permission without the technical details consent. This is simply, I say simply because clearly it isn't, I understand everything you're saying. This is a principal matter as the application.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's bring in Councillor Fleming.
Yeah, just a quick one really. The engineering of how you would get 9 houses on that site is something that I would be very concerned about. But the point about it is, like everyone else has said, that's the next stage of this job. So it leaves us the opportunity to get the applicant then to make sure that they submit sufficient information that they can submit that without having landslip and all the other sort of problems that come along with it. But I don't think this is the stage to talk about those particular engineering principles. So from that perspective, I'll go along with the officer's recommendation at this point.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Fleming. Well, all I would respond to that with is that Councillor Harvey did ask a question much earlier on as to whether or not the applicant could have come forward with a smaller number of houses on this development rather than up to 9. Councillor Rolfe.
Yeah, the Borden Hill site, the one that got through an appeal, it's already next to an urbanisation. The one we're looking at now, there is a gap. And the reason I feel very strongly about it, the Borden Hill one, the appeal one, does not have a crossing. This potentially has a crossing, which makes that whole area urban. It brings it right back and up the hill to urbanise a much bigger area. And I think it's very, very different from the appeal site, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rolfe. I mean, I'm going to enter the debate now, as I'm entitled to do, even though I was on the chair of this meeting. Had this been a PIP for 1 to 4 or some smaller number, I think I might have considered it differently, but it's a PIP for up to 9 on a really quite sensitive landscape. And we've heard representations from that, from local objections. The architect himself said it wouldn't probably suit, that area doesn't suit some sort of estate type development. It would have to be some sort of ribbon development. But in front of us, we've got a PIP for 9. And my personal view is I think the sensitivity of the landscape in this area, the land use and the scale of the PIP up to 9 is overwhelming for that site. I think it will be significantly detrimental. And I tend to disagree with the case officer in that respect. I think that the harm caused to that landscape will be greater than has been assessed by the case officer. That's my personal opinion. So do we wish to continue the debate? Does anybody else like to speak on this matter? Anybody else like to add something else? Councillor Ballinger.
Just to, obviously, when we keep referring back to the Borden Hill, it's kind of like ingrained in my brain now when I go to sleep. But I think the difference, as Councillor Rolfe has said, is where this is potentially going to be positioned. It's kind of like it's up a hill. It's not in a situation like this current Borden Hill site is. It's not. In my opinion, it's not safe. You know, and for me, that's kind of like the crucial aspect here. If it was going to be safe and it was going to add something, then absolutely. But this is going to be detracting, in my opinion, from the landscape majorly. But then also, I've just got in my brain, I'm just envisioning potentially having accidents there. That's all.
Okay, thanks very much. Does anybody else like to speak, or are we done? In which case, we can bring it to a conclusion, hopefully, if I just find my notes. We had a proposal from Councillor Adam to grant in accordance with recommendations of the officers, and that was seconded by Councillor Harvey, as I remember. Is that right? Okay. And that's a recommendation that this be granted subject to terms for location, use and amount of development as described in the application, which I believe includes a crossing of the road. So could I have a show of hands, please, for all those in favour of that proposal?
5.
And against that proposal?
5.
5. So we have a deadlock on that. Do we need to go to the next proposal? Well, in which case I stick with my vote, which is a casting vote to refuse. And that would be a refusal on the basis of significant... Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. That motion. Okay, so my casting vote is against that motion. Okay, thank you. Then we need to go to the next one. So we'll go to the second motion, which is Councillor Rolfe's motion, which is a proposal to refuse for reasons of significant harm to the landscape on scale and land use issues, which was seconded by Councillor Eden.
Chair, do you want to check with the planning manager if she believes she has sufficient?
Yeah.
Thank you. From what I have established from the discussions, obviously the officer has identified harm to the landscape within their officer report, and members have referenced that. So in terms of the impact, we've identified that the application doesn't accord with policies CS5, CS9, CS15 and AS10 of the core strategy. My understanding is that members consider that greater weight should be attributed to the adverse impact in terms of that harm. A number of sort of scales of harm have been identified, and I think that, as Councillor Keithley has just mentioned, he considers that that is significant harm. So I'm satisfied if members are taking the vote that that is the weight that they are attributing to that harm. Is that an agreement?
I'm absolutely fine with that.
Councillor Eden.
I think some of those were my words.
All right. Okay, so planning manager is happy with that. The proposal from Councillor Rolfe to refuse on those grounds, seconded by Councillor Eden. So can we have a show of cards in favour of Councillor Rolfe's proposal, please, to refuse?
5.
And a show of hands against that proposal to refuse?
5.
So again, we have another deadlock. So my casting vote is in favour of Councillor Rolfe's proposal to refuse on the grounds of significant adverse harm to the landscape. Okay, thanks very much. Council has resolved to refuse that application number 2503048 PIP. Very close call. Thank you all. We're going to have a little break for 5 minutes, but thank you very much. You got stuck in traffic. Thank you very much for coming along to attend. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is application 26000240 FUL. It's 30 Mere Street, Stratford-on-Avon, and the presenting officer is Josh Cooper. So, Josh, when you're ready, talk us through this application, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. The application before members tonight is for the erection of solar panels on a terrace property in Stratford-on-Avon town centre. The application site is identified by the black dot on this plan. This is a location plan showing nearby listed buildings highlighted in red. Whilst it's not visible as far as I'm aware, I think the whole site lies within the conservation area. Actually, that pink dotted line, I think, is the boundary of the conservation area, possibly, but the majority of the surrounding area falls within the Stratford conservation area. This slide just shows the location plan and the ground floor site plan. So there is like an underpass where those cars are parked, but it's all obviously covered by the terrace at first floor. These are the existing and proposed roof plans, so the grey indicating the proposed solar panels in their extent. This is an existing and proposed front elevation, again reflecting what the solar panels would look like, where they would go and where they would be positioned on and around the building. This is just a bit of sort of information in respect of side profiles, so how much the solar panels would project off the roof plane, and just seeing those on a side profile and a cross section. These are some site photos, very recent ones, looking directly at the application property. This is the property in question, is the one in a light cream colour, so with the red and blue for sale board or to let board out the front. These photos are slightly further afield. So for the left one is stood on Henley Street, looking up Mere Street. The application property is on the right-hand side. You can just see the curved roof slope with the box dormers just visible on the right-hand side. The right-hand photo is looking on Mere Street towards Henley Street, with the application property on the left-hand side of the road as part of the long, continuous, curved terrace. Officer's recommendation is to refuse the application for the reasons set out in the committee report. There are no updates in the update sheet. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Josh. Okay, we've got one speaker on this item, and it's Mr. Norrie. Please come forward, Mr. Norrie. Thank you. Welcome to Planning Committee. And right, you've got the microphone on if you can speak. Have you got any slides or anything like that to go with this? No. Okay. So you have 3 minutes, and I'll give you a heads up when you're coming towards the end.
Thank you. So some of you may know me as the chair of the campaign group Stratford Climate Action. I also manage the Net Zero Stratford Climate Hub, which is based at 30 Mere Street, so we're the tenants at the property. One thing we do is offer independent advice to interested members of the public on solar panel and battery installations. Our landlord, Yue Guo, is a battery scientist at Coventry University who is very supportive of our aims, and we want to work together to use the installation to help inform the public about the benefits of renewable energy. I believe the officer has recommended refusal on the grounds that there is less than substantial, in other words fairly minor, negative aesthetical impact in a conservation area. He considers there are insufficient public benefits to outweigh this. I would like to challenge both points. Regarding the first point, Mere Street is in the conservation area, as is much of Stratford town centre, but already strongly reflects recent waves of modernisation. Most of the street, including our building, consists of post-war buildings, and the hub itself faces the old Bard's Walk shopping arcade. There are modern shop fronts, commercial signage, and we are next to a Chinese takeaway and 2 doors down from an Indian restaurant. Very little on the street is Shakespearean, and the officer's report notes that the proposal would not harm the setting of any nearby listed buildings. Putting some fairly demure black solar panels on a roof that the report itself considers neutral seems to me a moderate development and in keeping with the kind of change the street has seen in the past. Regarding the second point, the Council has declared a climate emergency. Words like emergency can go stale, But if you've watched the national emergency briefing, you'll know that even at 2 degrees of warming, scientists are worried about a possible collapse of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, the ocean current that shifts heat northwards from the equator and gives us our mild British climate. This would mean frozen winter months, with temperatures even in London reaching minus 20 degrees in some winters. That's in addition to hotter summers and would mean British agriculture basically becoming impossible. I think this should reasonably be given more weight than the kind of minor aesthetic impacts we're talking about here, and I note that the Town Council has also taken this perspective. The report's argument is basically that it's just a small rooftop installation and it only benefits one private tenant, but small roofs add up. According to a 2023 report by the Great Britain Foundation, if suitable homes all had solar panels installed, that could provide around 45 terawatt hours of clean electricity each year, the same as the UK's current onshore wind production.
About 15 seconds to go, if you could just wind up, please.
Okay. I think this is also in the interest of small businesses in the town centre. I think Stratford should have a thriving town centre, and it's important for small businesses that they should be able to access cheap energy. I think if conservation area is interpreted so stringently as to rule out opportunities to help the town centre thrive, what are we conserving? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Norrie. Members, have any questions for Mr. Norrie, please? I have a question for you, please. Okay. You mentioned, I think, that the applicant, did you say he was some sort of solar and battery scientist?
He's a battery scientist at Coventry University, yes.
So does he have displays of solar panels and batteries somewhere other than this particular property? I mean, has he got access to displaying and showing this sort of technology to people elsewhere?
I have no idea, but potentially at Coventry University, but certainly not in Stratford.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. Councillor Ballinger.
Good evening. Have you met with conservation? Sorry, have you had any meetings with the conservation to talk about?
I believe that the landlord did, but not myself.
Okay, do we have a report or anything on that? Like, what have they? Do we know what they've said?
I don't think so. No.
I think you can ask a clarification of the case officers in that respect. Councillor Ballinger, please. Any other questions? No. Okay, Mr. Norrie, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so there were no other speakers, so we can move on to those questions. So do you want to start, Councillor Ballinger, and then Councillor Parry?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Joe. Sorry, Josh. I saw Joe earlier. Josh. In terms of conservation, have we? Do we know if we've spoken to conservation? Have we got a conservation report or anything of that nature?
Yeah, so this isn't an application in which we would formally consult conservation officers. However, officers have the opportunity, which was undertaken in this case, to undergo what's known as a surgery. A surgery is a meeting with a conservation officer in which we informally discuss an application and get their views. This was done so in this case, and actually I had the advice from 2 conservation officers who both agreed with the approach that I'd taken in terms of the visual impacts of this and this causing harm to the conservation officer. Sorry, the conservation area. There we go.
Can I just have a follow-up, please, Chair?
Yeah, please.
Do we know of any other solar panels within the area on roofs?
Immediately within Mere Street, I'm not aware, and I'm mindful that when you go onto Henley Street, that's where the real core of the old traditional buildings is, and I really don't believe there are. More widely within Stratford, you may find some that are directly on flat roofs, for example, so they're completely on more modern buildings that are completely not visible, for example. That may be the case, but I haven't got any evidence to confirm that.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Ballinger. Councillor Parry.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, and apologies, committee, for being a bit late this evening. I therefore might have missed this because I wasn't here, but I wonder whether the officers can advise why this application is not being put forward for determination on the basis that whilst Stratford-upon-Avon Town Council is in support, they did not register to speak, and normally when we have something in support and we haven't got any speakers, it is determined by officers. So, but forgive me for being late. It might have been clarified at the beginning of the meeting.
Thanks, Emily.
In terms of the council's scheme of delegation, the reason that usually it wouldn't come to committee where the ward member in the parish council or the town council in this case haven't registered to speak is it's very explicit that it is where there are no other registered speakers. So in this case, we did have a registered speaker who was speaking in support of the application, and as officers are making a recommendation to refuse, that's why it still came.
Okay, Councillor Ballinger, another question.
Yeah, just one more, Chair, thank you. Just going back to your recommendation, Josh, in terms of when you mention the visual amenities and obviously this being detrimental to that, I know this might be hypothetical, so bear with, but let's say, for example, it was a flat roof and you couldn't see it. Would you then say that would be less detrimental? I know in this case there's no flat roof, but I'm just saying hypothetically, given the fact that it's a pitched, you would then see it.
I think members have to consider the visual impact of things, and one of those aspects is how visible is something. I can't comment on what a forthcoming application would be on a flat roof. However, members need to consider whether this is prominent, as I've discussed. Is it visually dominant? And, you know, need to really assess the application before them, that's all.
Thanks. Could I ask a question, Josh? Could you just take us through these roofs, because you said in your presentation these roofs are part of a curve, aren't they? So can you just show us any photographs that illustrate the curved roof, and why is that important? That curve?
Yeah. So the conservation area appraisal sets out that these properties are more modern. There's no getting away from that. However, they have taken notes from other more traditional properties within the wider conservation area of the town centre. The key points here being tiled roofs that are curved in some cases, and ones that have overhanging jetties, which is that sort of overhanging element at the bottom. Now, the important point with this application site, as these photos show, is that the application property forms part of what is a very dominant, but sort of a dominant terrace, but there are elements of continuity in the fact that this is an exposed, long, curved roof terrace. And when these solar panels are on there, they're going to be viewed in direct conjunction with what is immediately surrounding it. And therefore, in our opinion, this would break up that continuity of the roof of the roof slope being curved, would become more dominant, and would disrupt the prevailing character of the property, which I've assessed as being neutral in character.
Okay, I think you asked, Councillor Ballinger asked a question about the conservation officer's views. Were they moderately in support, moderately against this, or what was their general sense of these panels on that property? Could you help us with their assessment?
Yeah, their informal views were that this is concerning, and that the severity in which this would have a visual impact is significant. And, you know, and just to make it clear that whilst I've identified less than substantial harm, you know, when we're talking about levels of harm in terms of the MPPF, substantial harm is when you're really talking about the loss of a whole asset. You're not talking about the loss of a listed building or the loss of a significant feature within a conservation area. An application to alter an existing building is unlikely to have that amount. Less than substantial harm is still afforded significant weight by the MPPF, and it should be given that. That shouldn't be used to reduce it whatsoever. That is, that is a type of harm. The MPPF is clear that that should be given significant weight, and the conservation officers that I spoke to informally were strongly against this proposal and were fully supportive of how I dealt with the application.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Councillor Rolfe next.
I'm slightly concerned about the pictures because it's giving the impression that that street is quite wide, and in fact it's not at all that wide. I think there's been a bit of a fisheye lens on that, a little bit. I'm not sure when you walk down that street you're going to even notice that there's solar panels on that roof. Because of its narrowness, because you haven't got and apart from there, but no, you haven't got that vista. Doesn't make sense to me. The panels themselves, can you go back to the picture where you show the sloping there? No, the one before. So they're either side of the boxed window coming out. How many are there going to be of them?
We haven't got that number. What is proposed is on the plan that the solar panels will cover that area. I don't have a specific number.
So can you go back to the picture and show me the entire area they are going to cover, please? So, okay, thank you.
You're right, Councillor Rolfe. I know that you've probably got more, more experience of this particular street than many of us have got. But I just asked Josh a question about the conservation officer's view of that, and I'm minded to think that that response that Josh gave us is quite an important one. Who else would like to ask any clarifications? No? In which case we can move on to the debate. Debate? Yeah, okay. Councillor Ballinger, Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. I think Josh has done a good job of the report, and actually from that photo, in my opinion, it is detrimental to the overall street scene itself. I think a couple of things that have come out from me is the conservation officers have strongly, I think the word strongly here is coming to my mind. So I agree with the officer's recommendation, and I will be proposing to go with the officer's recommendation, Chair, to refuse.
Thank you, Councillor Ballinger. That's a proposal to follow the officer's recommendations and refuse
Just to
this
clarify,
application.
it is a proposal.
Yeah,
yeah.
Got it. Don't worry, no problem. Thank you. Councillor Parry, please.
Thank you very much. I'd be delighted to second Councillor Ballinger's proposal. I know this particular street very well, having launched my business in Stratford, literally round the corner. And I think the addition of the solar panels on this route would cause a complete blot and blight on the area of Mere Street. And I do think, whilst we do have a climate emergency, just because we have that, we shouldn't be losing out on the vista of our streets. And Mere Street, whilst hasn't got the heritage of other streets, it does have its own historical significance. So I'm very happy to support Councillor Ballinger to follow the officer's recommendation, and will second the proposal.
I have that. Thank you, Councillor Parry. Back to you, Councillor Ballinger.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, I've proposed. I just want to make it clear that I'm not against solar panels. On the contrary, I think they're incredibly important in the world we are living in at the moment. But just to reiterate, I don't feel this street is right, and with the roofs as they are down that street, given the fact conservation area. That is the makeup of my thought process. So it's not that I'm against solar panels. On the contrary, I am pro.
Well, I'm glad that you said that, because I would share your views, but I also share your views on the response we got from the case officer in respect to the conservation area officer, and also I'm concerned about a precedent being set for the historic centre of the town. We've got some others coming in now. Councillor Passingham was next.
This, to me, is a very subjective opinion that's being taken here. I know this street very well, and I walk down it, and I don't think I've ever noticed anything on any of the roofs. It's a narrow street. These are modern buildings with all sorts of commercial fascias on them. And I can't see how this is any harm at all to the conservation area. They're going to be dark solar panels like they all are now. and I can't see that anybody's going to notice. So, I would support their.
Councillor Harding next.
Thank you. Yes, it's an interesting report because it does sort of evaluate things quite nicely. It says, top of 26, for example, I do not consider that the installation of solar panels would be detrimental to any amenities of surrounding occupiers by way of overbearing, overlooking or loss of light and or glint and glare. But we make a big thing about them being all shiny and black earlier on. The fact is, you don't notice the roofs when you walk along there. The road is narrow. You can only see the roof if you go to the other side of the road with your back to the buildings. We do have a climate emergency, and if you ask people whether they would rather put solar panels in fields or on roofs, they will say roofs every time. What sort of an example are we setting if we turn this down? It's not a great area of architectural interest. We have that that wondrous piece of architecture at the end of the road, not 40 metres away, the NatWest Bank. What are we thinking of? Nobody is going to look at this. I can see no reason to turn this down. These are modern buildings. Quite frankly, I spend more time tidying up the street level than I would the roof because they are a mess. It's just a nod towards the Tudor style with these overhanging jitties. And again, that makes it even harder to see what's above it, 3 stories up. Nobody looks up. I would like to propose that we go against the officer's recommendation and approve this application.
Okay, Councillor Harding, thank you. So I've got a proposal for you to grant. Reasons, I'm just. So I need to understand exactly what your reasons are, given the reasons that the officer has recommended refusal. How would you propose a grant in respect of the reasons for refusal, which includes what we've heard about the conservation officer's strong objections?
Well, on the basis that it's not going to impinge on the street scene because it's way above the normal eye level. It's not going to be to the detriment of the visual amenities of the street scene. There are more important things to worry about at street level, ground level.
Okay, and what about the issue of the Stratford-on-Avon conservation area?
We've got a climate emergency. We've got to loosen up on these things. I've got stacks of listed buildings in my area. We are not even allowed to put in double-glazed units in windows.
Yeah. Do you think we should put double-glazed units in the windows of historic buildings?
Perfectly acceptable replica windows that look exactly the same as the old ones, but they're double-glazed.
Yeah. So it's really important that we get this right, because if you're going to go against the officer's recommendation, we need good reasons for doing so. So the first reason you're giving is you don't think it would result in any change of the character of the property to the detriment of the visual amenity of the street scene. So that's number one.
That's right. That's number one.
So how do you propose to address the issue of the less than substantial harm to the conservation area, given that we've got loads of buildings that aren't in a conservation area in Stratford?
Because these are all modern buildings, and
it's in the conservation area.
But are these buildings listed?
I don't know. Doubt it.
They're not statutory listed buildings, no.
They're modern buildings.
Yeah.
You expect to see modern facilities.
So what you're saying is that you would say there is no harm to the conservation area?
Exactly that.
Okay.
Nobody's going to notice it.
So no street scene impact and no harm to the conservation area. Okie dokie. Councillor Harvey, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chairman. I will declare the interest I discussed earlier on. I have got solar panels on my house and they've been there for 12 years, so I'm not opposed. This is getting tortuous. We're not going to solve the Gulf Stream problem by approving or disapproving these particular solar panels. You've got the clearest possible view from conservation officers that have been consulted that this would be to the detriment of the conservation area. You've got the case officer saying exactly the same. That will have been discussed with the planning manager, who presumably took exactly the same point of view. This is the clearest possible steer for a refusal. I can't see the argument, to be frank. This is the conservation area of a predominant asset within the country. When you start talking about where's the next most important conservation area to the centre of Stratford, you might be talking about perhaps York or somewhere, the Shambles, etc. This is a premier conservation area. You've got the clearest possible steer from conservation officers that this would be detrimental, would cause less than substantial harm, and you would give it the right amount of weight, so to speak. I do, and I will be voting to refuse.
Thank you. Who wanted to come in on this? Councillor Adam.
Thank you. Similar to the last application, do you mind if I start with a very quick question to the officer to prime my representation?
You wish.
Thank you. With regards to conservation areas, accepting that this case is specific to this one, are you aware of other areas in the district, other conservation areas in the district where solar panels have been allowed?
I am not aware of any other solar panels that have been put in a prominent location of what we've considered this. No, I'm not aware of any others.
Well, just specifically, not prominent in the sense that
I'm not aware of any other applications for solar panels in the centre of conservation areas.
The,
No.
But even if there was, this is the application in front of us, this conservation area, and the feedback you've had from the case officer in respect to what the conservation officer has said.
Chair, if you let me finish, I'm aware of that, and I was going to, as I said, make a representation. I'm sympathetic to the view that Councillor Harding has put forward, because I'm trying to understand the nature of the harm and how that is characterised with regards to the conservation area, and beyond that, see if there's anything specific about this conservation area which is more pertinent than others, as it were, linking it to the specific case that we're looking at. I think the thing that I was worrying about going back through the report tonight, which Councillor Harding did touch upon, which resonated with me, was that the glossy nature of them was the thing that's different from the roof tiles. But then later in the report, it is pointed out that there wouldn't be a glint or glare aspect. And then it's also looking at how visible that would be. Beyond that, we're talking about it being on a modern building in isolation, but if they all had solar panels on it, we probably wouldn't notice it in the same way. That's starting to look into hypotheticals. My point is that we seem to go into quite semantic arguments here, understandably so given the sensitivity, but it seems that we are splitting hairs on something which elsewhere may be relatively acceptable. That's why I wanted to ask. I'm aware of solar panels in a building in the conservation area in my ward. That's why I was asking if they're aware of them. So I wanted to know if there was any obvious policy context to that.
I think if you're after something specific, obviously things are done on a case-by-case basis here, and as referenced in the report, I've identified the conservation area review specifically says that this roof is prominent. That's in an appraised document that has reviewed the conservation area in the context that these buildings aren't historical buildings. They are, in the grand scheme of things, relatively modern day, and yet still concludes they are prominent. And so if you're looking for something to be saying, well, why not here? To me, that's saying that this is prominent, and and conservation areas are extremely different in their rhythm, their nature, their materiality, and therefore the application of one in or not in one area is not a precedent in other conservation areas, depending what their rhythm, their design, their sort of nature is. And so you're looking at this one in this conservation area, and you know, as stated, we've had input from experts who have suggested that it's not acceptable.
Thank you. That's exactly the illumination I wanted on this, because I wanted to understand how the context of this conservation area differed from others, because I accept we've had officers with conservation as their expertise consult on it, but we've got to look at them from a consistency point of view as well as having a view on how they impact. My takeaway is I'm conflicted, as I think you could probably tell by my representations. I'm sympathetic to Councillor Harding's view. I don't think I could sort of second it to go that far, but I also don't see the harm myself from the context of it and my interpretation of it.
Yeah.
So at the moment, I'm almost going to abstain because I just can't come down on one side or the other. But
all I can draw you to is reason 2 for recommendation, which is that the officers and in consultation with the conservation officer believe that in this particular location, on this particular roof, in this particular conservation area, regardless of whether or not there's some solar panels on some other roof somewhere else, it causes less than substantial harm to the Stratford-on-Avon conservation area, and that recommendation is that reason is supporting the recommendation for refusal. Right, now I've got some more hands up. Now, Councillor Rolfe spoke earlier. Councillor Passingham has already given his view, but I'll come back to you. Councillor Rolfe.
Okay. I would like to second Councillor Harding, but I don't solely agree with the fact that there is no harm at all. I think there is a little harm, but I think it's, in my opinion, it's worth the risk. I think the street is narrow. I think that I don't think you're going to notice it. I think we've got to be very careful. We have a climate change emergency. I mean, the cruel irony is that the tenants are net zero, whom I know very well, and I do know Stephen Norrie very well, and we've got to think about the future here. And I don't think we're setting a precedent here. I would like to second Councillor Harding's proposal on the grounds, but only if he'll take back the word "there is no harm," because I think there is a little harm, but I think it's livable with.
Perfectly.
Okay, I need to just take some advice on that, because you said there was no harm to the conservation area, and now I've got somebody prepared to second you, provided you change your proposal. So hang on a second.
Okay. Minimal.
If members come to the conclusion that there is harm, they would have to come to the conclusion that there are public benefits sufficient to outweigh that harm.
So let's take that one on then. So, Councillor Rolfe, are you satisfied, or can you explain to the committee how you feel about the public benefits that come with this solar installation, and that they would outweigh the harm that is caused, if you think there is some harm?
Oh, that's a difficult one. In my opinion,
You'd probably have to. Sorry to interrupt you, but you'd have to identify public benefit.
the public benefit will be the climate, protecting the climate. That is the public benefit. And I do appreciate that particular area of Mere Street, and I know it's in Councillor Harding's ward, but I mean it's an area I know extremely well. To me, in fact, I'm quite surprised it's in a conservation area, because across the road it isn't. And that's why I'm conflicted here. The public benefit, there's always got to be a public benefit conserving our planet. There's always got to be a public benefit. That would be my opinion.
Okay, I don't know. I can't see that myself. I think this is a private benefit for the production of some electricity on that particular development, on that particular property. But if you're still conflicted and you're not sure how you're going to explain it, I'm going to have to hold that thought for a minute, because if you're saying there is some harm, you've got to explain what outweighs that. And at the moment, we've got a proposal that there's no harm at all. Councillor Passingham.
I think the public benefit is obvious. It's it can be used as a demonstrator site with batteries. It'll be a perfect example of how you can mitigate against climate change and save energy and save money, how small businesses can reduce their electricity bills because they're all struggling. So there's tremendous public benefits, I think, that will outweigh the small amount of harm, which I'm still struggling to see what harm there is, because I don't think anybody will notice them on the roofs.
Okay, anybody else like to speak on this? Councillor Ballinger?
Yeah, earlier on, someone mentioned around it doesn't set a precedent. I believe it probably could do, in the sense that we would, Stratford is one of those places where we need to protect. It's one of the most historical towns in the UK. Before you know it, we'll have Shakespeare's house wanting to put them on the roof. That's why I'm looking at it. I'm not against solar panels at all, but I think just in Stratford, it's just not like the centre of Stratford conservation area. That's just where my mindset is, and this is why I proposed.
Sorry, hold on a second. Just bear with us a minute. I'm just going to check something in the application. Okay. Do you want to would you comment on that, please, Emily? This is really important, because if you consider that there is some harm, Councillor Harding says there's none at all, but then that's, in my personal opinion, ignoring the advice of the Conservation Officer. Councillor Rolfe thinks there is some harm, but a modest amount of harm. Certainly not less than substantial, which is what the case officer has found in his recommendations. So it comes down to whether or not the harm is outweighed by the public benefit, and the public benefit's identified, and whether or not that is identified. It's not good enough to say we think there's a public benefit. Let's see what the application says about the public benefit that's coming.
Thank you, Chair. So what we were doing as officers was just going through the design and access statement that was submitted with the planning application, because I'm mindful that members have stated a number of perceived benefits, including that it would be a demonstrator, and that businesses would be able to come and look and see what is happening. That hasn't been put forward within the application as a benefit. But what I would say is that the officer has addressed where public benefits can be seen to outweigh less than substantial harm. and an appeal decision is referenced within the officer's report at page 28. And I apologise, but I will read this verbatim because I do think it will be helpful for members. In this appeal decision, where it was in respect of the public benefits in a conservation area, the inspector has concluded the development is associated with a private dwelling, therefore saving money on energy is not a public benefit. I acknowledge the need to increase the use of renewable energy and to improve the energy efficiency of buildings. However, due to the scale of the development, the public benefits in terms of selling energy back to the national grid, reducing air pollution and the effects of global warming are limited and do not outweigh the great weight that is required to be given to harm caused to the significance of the designated heritage asset. So I think that helpfully clarifies how the inspectorate have judged that the case of impacting on bills of either private homeowners or businesses.
Yeah, very helpful that, I think, Emily. Certainly to me, anyway. Right, Councillor Harding, you want to continue the debate?
Well, a query on that. That was talking about a heritage asset, that appeal, as far as I'm aware. This is not a heritage asset. This is a modern building.
The site is in a conservation area.
Yes.
That is a statutory designated heritage asset.
So is the NatWest Bank, which is absolutely hideous.
Yeah, but that's already there, and this is an application in front of us consideration now. So a statutory designated heritage asset is a conservation area.
Well, I would have said a heritage asset would carry more weight than something just in a conservation
Well, you just
area.
heard the case officer's explanation of the conservation area. Could you go over it again, Josh?
Yeah, so the conservation area is a defined area. Now, all of that conservation area is given the same level of statutory protection, regardless of what buildings are in it. If, for argument's sake, previously it was considered that such an area was so uninteresting for some reason, it may have been excluded from the conservation area. However, this application site is in it. It is in the conservation area, which is in a statutory designated heritage asset, which is given the same weight as being in a listed building, for example. That is a designated heritage asset.
Okay, thanks, Josh. So we do go back to that issue of no harm or harm and public benefit. So, Councillor Passingham, last go, I think.
I think the public benefit is that it could be, I'm sure it will be used as a demonstrator site as to how businesses can save money and help the fight climate change and
okay, that's fine, and that's an opinion, a supposition, but it's not identified in the application, and that's the important thing.
It's not. It's not just saving energy for private business. There'll be public benefit because it can be used as a demonstrator site of how solar panels and batteries can save businesses money and businesses that are normally struggling. So I'd like to second the proposal made by Councillor Harding anyway.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, because you hadn't done that at this point. You'd said that you would favour granting and you're going to second.
Yeah.
Second,
Councillor Harding's.
Sorry, Chair, I think...
Sorry, Chair. I originally said I would second, but I won't second if Councillor Harding continues with the fact that there is no harm, because I do believe there is an element of harm.
Okay, well, so really, so you're not going to second, because at the moment you've got no harm. So I'm going to come, before I come back to you, Councillor Harding, just hold on a minute, please. I'm trying to manage this conversation. Councillor Harvey was next.
Thank you, Chairman. On Councillor Passingham's argument, anybody is quite entitled to come around and look at my house and use it as a demonstrator for the benefits of the advantages of solar panels.
And mine too, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Right, now, who would like to speak next? Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Harding. and then I'm going to come on to Councillor Adam.
I was just going to clarify, I'm quite happy to amend it to minimal rather than no harm.
So you're amending your proposal to say that there's some harm?
Minimal.
Minimal. I'm not so confident with that description of the level of harm. It's not a level of harm that I recognise, so I'm going to have to defer probably to Josh to, if you're going to accept there is some level of harm in the conservation area, let's just make it absolutely clear what you're saying. Josh, what levels of harm could we consider? Emily.
The MPPF talks about there being less than substantial harm identified to a designated heritage asset, which for the purpose of the MPPF, just to clarify, does include buildings within conservation areas. That is within the glossary definition of the MPPF. So just to draw you back to the relevant paragraph, which if you could bear with me 2 seconds, I will get it up just to read it to you.
I'd like to know whether or not there's a definition of minimal harm.
There is not.
There is not. So I can't accept that then at the moment. So, Emily, please read us the rest of it.
Members can, obviously there is when you're making an assessment as to if you do identify harm, you may well say that you consider that the way that we would approach it is we would say, well, we've identified less than substantial harm. But you may say that within that remit, it's at the lower end of less than substantial harm. But to use the phrase that has already been said, that isn't a phrase that we commonly would use. I think members would need to consider how much harm there is in regards to the less than substantial harm that's been identified.
Do we need to be mindful that if we were to consider that there was some degree of less than substantial harm, that would set a precedent for future applications? And appeal decisions, perhaps? Representations at appeal?
Obviously, every application is determined on its merits, as we've already addressed, but I think in terms of the weight that's afforded to certain elements, like the benefits, as officers have already said, we're not clear on what public benefits have actually been advanced as part of the submission, although I appreciate that it's been alluded to at some point during the debate. We haven't seen that as part of the application. So if officers are, if committee members are asserting weight to specific benefits, like the energy production, like the potential cost benefits to a small business, then that in itself could be a precedent. Equally, if within this conservation area harms have been identified and they've been outweighed by specific benefits, then again that could be a precedent.
How unusual.
I'll tell you now that at that point I'm going to draw this debate to a conclusion, because we do have to start with, we had a proposal from Councillor Ballinger and a second from Councillor Parry on the table first. So Councillor Adam and then Councillor Scorer.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say the fullness of the debate and the incredibly useful representations by our planning officers have firmed up my position, and I'll be going along with the officers' recommendations. I think there is a degree of subjectivity when it comes to impact on heritage assets, but we've been fairly clear from our officers, both present and the ones that they've consulted with, that there will be the harm, and I can't see that that's outweighed by any benefit. So that's the way I'm going.
Great, well said. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Adam. And that actually described the issue quite nicely, that we've identified that there is some harm and you couldn't see that they are outweighed by public benefit. Councillor Scorer.
Thank you, Chair. The officer answered my question, but also one of the other questions I was going to ask. Can we cut to the chase and go to the vote, please?
Well, we're about to do just that. So I've got a proposal on the table from the first proposal, which was Councillor Ballinger, which was to follow the officer's recommendation and refuse planning permission for those reasons set out, sensitivity of the locality and the less than substantial harm to the conservation area. And that was seconded by Councillor Parry. Am I right in saying that, Councillor Parry? Happy to do that. Right, can we have a show of hands, please, for all those in favour of that proposal? Good. And for those against that proposal? Two. In which case that's carried. So committee oh, sorry, got an abstention. I beg your pardon, Councillor Rolfe. I wasn't following that. So in which case Council resolves to refuse the application 26002040 FUL Mere Street for the solar panels on the roof. Thank you very much. Any other business? Any urgent business? No? No? Okay. Just members, if you sit back a minute, I'm going to close the meeting, but if you just don't disappear, after I've closed the meeting, I'll invite Emily just to give us a very, very quick 2-minute update on a couple of appeal decisions. So thank you very much, everybody.